you. Yeah, like Sandra said, I work at Willow in Chicago, but I also get to travel around and support churches all around the nation and helping move their cultures of inclusion forward, which is one of my favorite things to do. And I noticed that in the last 5 years or so, I have seen this theme emerge from small group leaders. So a lot of times when I go to visit with churches, we do training for their volunteers, their small group leaders, and I have found that well-meaning and seasoned leaders have this idea in their head of what small groups should look like. And then if it doesn't look like that when they're, leading the group, they become very discouraged. And so then I hear from the ministry leaders, we're losing all our small group leaders and we don't know why. And so I spent a lot of time over the last several years talking with some of these small group leaders and kind of figuring out what is it that is hard right now for you as a small group leader? And it's always some kind of version of, I don't think I'm connecting with the kids. Maybe they need somebody younger. I can't get them to sit still or pay attention. And I had an experience earlier last year. I was where was I? I was in Nashville. And I had a man come up to me and say, I just don't think I'm cut out to be a small group leader anymore. And he said he's been doing it for over 20 years, and he's loved it, but he's just having a hard time. And so I said, tell me a little bit more about that. And he said, the kids, they're not listening, they're not paying attention, they're not sitting still, and I just don't think I'm helping them learn about Jesus on Sunday mornings. And so I asked him if he grew up in the church, and he did. And I asked him to tell me a little bit about his experience in small group. And he said, well, we sat in a circle and we were quiet and we raised our hand when we were going to answer a question. And we, listened and answered whatever our leader was telling us. And then I kind of let him sit with that for a second. And he filled the silence by saying, I guess kids just aren't the same today. And that's exactly it. And kids aren't the same today. And of course they're different, right? Like all generations have specific influences, culture, all different things that make them who they are as kids and as a generation. And that's why we even have a name for every single generation, right? And that's why you can, I was just doing a bunch of research on it, and the kids who grew up in the Great Depression have very specific attributes. And our kids right now that we're serving, they do not know a world without technology. The youngest of the kids, they've never had parents who don't have an iPhone or a smartphone, right? And so while he was sort of lamenting when he said, kids today are just different, it's really not a moral issue, it's just fact. And every generation, kids are different because of the way culture and different influential factors, affect who we are. So these well-meaning small group leaders, they are Jesus following. They're excited to, be with, kids in the church, and that's how they want to serve. But they have this picture in their head of what it should look like. And then when it doesn't look like that, they think they are failing. And no one likes to do something that they think they're not good at, right? And so that's when we start to see small group leaders try to find a different place to serve. And so what we've done is talked about some specific areas where small group leaders could feel a little bit more equipped. And so the 4 big areas are what we'll talk about today briefly. The first one is movement. So the biggest question is probably, why won't my kids sit still? And they just have this picture in their head that the kids should sit in a circle, crisscross, applesauce, but that was maybe kids 25 years ago. My small group, we did that. But that's really not the reality today. And with the rise of sensory processing disorder, the diagnosis of autism is also continuing to grow. Trauma affects the way we process sensory information. All of these things, all of these diagnoses have something to do with movement. And movement can certainly help regulate our systems. Also, you don't need to have a diagnosis to need movement to help regulate your system, right? So the biggest thing is to help our small group leaders understand that It's okay if your kids are moving, right? They don't have to sit still. No one is looking at you as a small group leader and saying, you're not doing very well because your kids are, shuffling all around, right? And so I put a couple of things up on this slide that has ideas that can help channel that movement. So adaptive seating is one of my favorite things. Having a couple bean bags there, video rockers, those are things that can help regulate the proprioceptive system. Having, a weighted, and this is for, all kids in an included environment, right? But these things are still helpful to have. If there's, a free play time at the beginning of your Sunday school, having, a trampoline or even a swing in there, those are kinds of things that really can help regulate a student, which then promotes their ability to focus and concentrate on when you are sharing about Jesus. One of the next things that I would also say support this are fidgets. And that is also my next big question is, a lot of my seasoned, more experienced leaders believe that fidgets, they're just toys, and we shouldn't use them, and they're just a distraction. Or the other question I get a lot is, well, if I give one child a fidget, all the other kids in my group are going to want one. So here's the thing. Fidgets have been around for decades, and if you are an educator or a therapist of any kind, you know this. They've been around for decades because they're actually a tool proven to promote concentration and focus. And so, of course, just like any tool, it has to be the right tool for that child and at that right moment. So I would not give, a group of 6th grade boys a bunch of the squeeze balls because it's going to become a game or a weapon or something, right? But if you can have a few different options or find out if for the student who does need and require a fidget, find out, what his favorite one is, maybe what he uses at home or at school. Those are the good ones to have for your small group. Now, as far as the question of, well, everyone else wants one, that's okay. It's okay. There is nothing wrong with a lot of us, we fidget too, doodling. That's a form of fidgeting, right? So a lot of us can hold something in our hand and it helps us focus as well. So you just have to kind of pay attention and help your small group leaders and volunteers know when to take the fidget away, which they'll know very clearly if it becomes a weapon or is flying across the room. But the other ones, the puppets are a very easy one, and I have a bunch of resources after if you're interested. For how to make sure that it works for everybody. Another benefit of having a bin with these tools just there for your small group is it doesn't single anyone out, right? So anyone can then grab it and use it as needed. The third area that I often heard as I did my research with volunteers and small group leaders was this phrase, what do I do about my kids who are disruptive or my kids who are who misbehave, right? And so quicker for the slides, is it that we move on slides, is that right? Okay, while they're figuring, I think it works now. Somebody uses that kind of language with me, that they're describing a child as disruptive or misbehaving. What I encourage for leadership doing training there is to shift that language, right? Because research has shown that language informs how we view things, and of course the opposite is also true. And so we want to make sure that we are using language that makes us view a child as a child and not as a problem. And if someone comes up to me and says, what do I do about this disruptive boy? What they're really asking is, how do I fix this problem? And I don't want them to view the child as a problem, right? So that becomes a whole language shift. So when you're training your volunteers and your small group leaders, I would include language in there. And to be curious, instead of, he's a problem and he's misbehaving, we all know that that behavior is just communication, right? So what is he trying to communicate? Is there a pattern? Does it always happen at transitions that he becomes dysregulated, right? So looking at the whole picture and letting your small group leaders know that you're there to support them with that and happy to go observe with them and see, what could be the reason that this is happening with that child. Oftentimes it's simply dysregulation, and if we can regulate them during the free play activity time before they come to sit down for small group, that can alleviate the whole issue. And then the last question I get a lot, again from my, oftentimes it's my seasoned volunteers and small group leaders, is, well, I don't have time to pass out fidgets or to use visual schedules or these things because I have so much to get through. And so usually when I'm at a church doing a training for them, I bring their curriculum writer with, or whoever's in charge of, deciding what the kids and student agenda is for the Sunday mornings. And the reason I do that is because for them to hear it from the curriculum writer, for them to hear these activities, they are, intentional, and we want you to get through them, but they're not the goal. The goal is for the child to feel loved and seen, right? And if you're ignoring them or just trying to get through this, they're going to feel that instead, and they're not going to want to come back either. We had a student come up to us once, to our curriculum writer actually, and said, "Am I ruining this?" And she said, "No, why do you ask that?" And he said, "People tell me I ruin things." And that day, the topic was about how we are a creation. And it just reminded her as our curriculum writer that our friends, if they think there's something wrong with them, with how they were created, they're not going to want to know their creator anyways, right? So we really want to focus on making sure our kids are seen and loved before this agenda that we're trying to get through. And so empowering our small group leaders to know that, to give them that freedom to, take a little bit of that burden off, I have found is very helpful because I have a lot of type A friends, and you give them an agenda and they want to get through it. And so, having that flexibility that they don't have to is okay as well. Obviously, we could talk about this a lot longer. I do have a breakout later tonight. But I did just want to close the loop with about 9 months after I visited that church in Nashville. I was there finishing some other training. And I ran into him, and he said, "I have to be honest, I was going to quit. Even after your training, I was still going to quit, but my wife told me to just stick through it." And he said, our church added some of those adaptive seating things and other items. And he said, I think he had 5th grade boys. And he said, all of a sudden, I started to see these boys come in, and they would just kind of slink into these bean bags. And they'd grab a fidget, and they would not make eye contact with me, which used to bother me. But then I noticed they started to open up, right? They were looking at their fidget, but then they were opening up, and and hearing their stories and the heavy things they were carrying. And he said, we have one guy with autism in our group, and he just paces around behind our small group, and he sometimes, throws in his input, but when he's not there, our whole group misses his presence. And that's what it's about, is just creating small groups where everyone has a place to belong, right? And if we're so focused on, sitting criss-cross applesauce and getting through the agenda, no one's going to feel like they have a place to belong, and our leaders aren't going to feel successful at what they're doing either. And so if we can, allow, fidget spinning and crash pad landing and, sitting on bean bags, it will help with the retention of our volunteers and leaders, and of course with our families, because they'll want to come back because they feel seen and known. So this is my contact info if you have any questions, or I will be around, or I have a small group tonight. Thank you. Not a small group, a workshop. Thank you.